We've covered the vipers, now let's cover the raptors, because snakes and birds with apes on top a wonderful zoo shall make. Plus, I'm nothing if not a sellout, and since the viper video did well, time for a sequel! Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of sci-fi and all its over-the-top ridiculousness to you, the viewer. Today we're going to be going over Colonial Raptors, the blocky, beefy hybrid of troop transport, long-range scout, and giant flying missile brick. We'll be going over the different models and versions, what they can do, what they're supposed to do, and also including some of the sort of maybe canon versions and some fan concepts, because otherwise we pretty much just get the one. But first, if you want to support the channel directly, then check out the Patreon linked below and consider buying me a coffee. Or if spacebucks are short or tight, then like, sub, ring the bell, all that good stuff, because every little bit helps with the algorithm gods. And if you want to join a small but growing community of fellow turbo nerds, check out the Discord, all of which is linked in the description below. And with that, let's get on to the video, shall we? The Raptor. The gun-shipping, missile-boating, electronic warfare-ing counterpart to the Viper. The support and heavy firepower of the colonial fleet, strike assets, and a fat, rotund ship lumbering its way through space to deliver high explosives and sometimes the sun to the toasters. However, the Raptor we know and love has a few variants that rarely come up and a lot more variety than one would think such a small ship could carry. I should also say that this is going to include information from the Battlestar Galactica Deadlock video game, the various wikis, and the show itself. So if you see something that you never have before or seems conflicting, that's most likely why. Also, unlike the Vipers, which are just so convenient for research and scripting because they revel in numerical one after the other designations, the Raptors don't. Each of the design iterations and developments often have the same names and are only really distinguished between by when they were designed or what they're supposed to be doing. So to that end, let's start with the early example of the venerable battle bus, the early Cylon War Raptor. Now, I'm going to be using the visual example we see from the Blood and Chrome miniseries rather than the one from Deadlock, since I tend to view television and film depictions as, well, more canon than video games when conflicting ideas, depictions, and statements tend to crop up. So although the one from the video game looks really cool, I think it looks ugly, so I'm going to ignore it. This version of the barge is the first example we see chronologically, and it has a few extra and is missing a few interesting features. First up, let's establish that this beautiful bucket is mostly what we know and love, a pressurized interior crewed by two pilots with space for passengers, cargo, or anything really that needs to move from point A to point B. The early Raptor, however, has a different engine setup than what we see in the reimagined series. First and foremost, the actual sublight engines are mounted externally on little rotating pods, and this serves a dual purpose. Firstly, it allows the Raptor to enter and maneuver atmosphere when landing, since its RCS thrusters are not as robust as what we see later, so it needs to rely on these main engines to help it not eat the pavement at Mach Jesus when it comes in for a landing. These engines, however, also allow it to perform incredibly hard maneuvers during combat, allowing the Raptor to shake potential Cylon fighters, or in cases where the pilot has plot armor, or is incredibly skilled, even allows it to dodge missiles. The space normally reserved for the big engines on future Raptors is instead an extended crew compartment, a distinctive H-shaped tail and large glass canopy, both of which are missing on the modern Raptor. The first Cylon War Raptor is essentially a pressurized metal tube with systems and stuff bolted on outrigging wings or struts. Near the middle front was the electronic warfare and sensor console occupied by the co-pilot. This is how the crew could operate the ship's complicated sensor and communication equipment, as well as assisting or hampering other starships, depending on how much they disliked them. The most notable difference is when it comes to the weaponry. While the early Raptor can carry 8 underslung missiles and comes with customizable munitions racks on the wings and has the option to mount a forward autocannon, on the rear is a permanent gunner position that lets one of the crew operate the Toaster Slayer twin Gatling cannon. Essentially, bolt two A-10s together and then let the gunner take aim like it's Call of Duty and you have the appliance shredder. This was intended to shake pursuing Cylon fighters or destroy them outright if they tried to set up an attack run. Funny enough, the early Raptor was actually undercrewed. Hilariously so. It had 4 positions: pilot, co-pilot, E-War officer, and rear gunner, but it would only realistically carry 2 crew at any given time, meaning the second crew member would often have to choose between the gun to protect the ship, the electronic warfare systems for, well, disrupting the enemy, or sitting up in the co-pilot seat and helping to actually aim the anti-ship missiles that this thing carried. It makes sense, I guess, since early on this version of the Raptor was mostly consigned to what the Colonials called milk runs, low energy, low effort, almost no threat patrols, transport and resupply missions, using the Raptor as a glorified taxi basically due to its ability to carry up to 10 passengers and 4 crew. Anyways though, the early Raptor did see some use in more combat-oriented roles as well, however it was fairly limited and mostly focused on support. Despite having a few tricks to shake or outmaneuver Cylon strikecraft, it wasn't as maneuverable or survivable a ship as you would find in pretty much all the other Vipers and mainline combat craft. What the Raptor's role in combat actually was a mix of pseudo-support and defensive role. The early Raptor Dratus system allowed it to serve as an early warning alarm, detecting incoming Cylon craft well before the smaller sensors of other Vipers would be able to, but more important was the countermeasures and electronic warfare options available to it. However, the most notably strange and arguably least useful function of the Raptor was the fact that it had a breaching system installed underneath the cabin that allowed it to burn through the hulls of enemy ships and deliver a strike team of Marines. These Marines would then do what they specialize in, eating crayons and blowing shit up, and as it happens, they would be fresh out of crayons. After all, purple is their favorite, and those are military standard. This is a bit of a meme though, because boarding a Cylon ship in combat is a hilariously difficult and frankly stupid idea. But the breaching system would prove incredibly useful for search and rescue operations and covert sabotage or infiltration as well when you needed to get onto a station that maybe wasn't crewed by toasters, but was occupied by less than desirable human elements. However, to actually murder the electronics section at a hardware store, the 8 underslung missiles the Raptor carried could be fired and using its Dratus system, lock on and guide the missiles without the need to actually be facing its target. But for the most part, this is what the early Raptor was, a mix of a lot of different ideas and roles all bundled up into one ship, and while it could do a little of everything, it wasn't consistently competent enough at the more stressful stuff, like not dying when shot at to be used for full combat operations. The most notable difference from the modern Raptors, however, is that this initial brick of a ship didn't have an FTL drive, meaning it was limited to smaller patrols and had to be tied to a home station or Battlestar. And I do mean Battlestar or equivalent ships, since for the most part they were the only ones that had a flight deck big enough to carry and launch these things, since they were a little too big to fit into standard Viper launch tubes. And this is where a really interesting split happens in the Raptor's development. You see, this ship was a mismatch of different conflicting ideas from the very beginning that often didn't mesh well together. On the one side, you had the Battle Bus, a beefy snub fighter that could enter the edges of a furball and using a mix of countermeasures and E-War put down withering direct and indirect fire, and on the other, you had the Electro Uber, a transport meant to carry everything from Marines to politicians, used for search, rescue, scouting, and patrols that could, if necessary, like the old adage of stay strapped or get clapped preaches, mount heavier weapons but really wasn't suited for it. To that end, the next development of the Battle Bus was the Assault Raptor. Instead of trying to do all the logistics tasks that needed doing and contributing in combat, the Assault Raptor dumps any and all pretense and goes full gunship. To great effect. While the hull itself is the same rough frame, there are a number of significant changes. First and most obviously, the engines are no longer mounted in small pods on the side of the ship. Instead, the rear gunnery position has been removed entirely, and larger sublight engines have instead been mounted in the empty space along with more RCS thrusters. The H-tail has also been removed entirely and replaced with vertical struts mounted on the outliers of the ship, very similar in design to what we see on the modern design. It also changes the wings. While the original Raptor had a wide, platform-like base on the side of the vessel to assist people in boarding or disembarking the craft, the Assault Raptor entirely removes this section and instead bulks out the front and middle with significantly enchunkened armor, allowing its lower evasion to be compensated for with raw mass. But the changes to weaponry and equipment are significantly more impressive. The electronic warfare suite has for the most part been removed, as have the customizable weapon mounts, and instead, mounted to the front are 4 large kinetic energy cannons similar to those found on the Viper, but significantly more powerful, able to do light damage even to capital ships. And mounted on the top amidships are the twin colossal missile racks, holding 12 each and able to reload an additional 6 from extra internal space, for a total of 36 guided munitions or 3 salvos of 12. Now, if it were simply a giant bucket of bombs and missiles, that would be one thing, but the Raptor was built with a powerful Dratus and sensor equipment as part of its core frame, so why waste it? In this case, however, it's to continue to make the enemy's life hell rather than protect the lives of your friends. The Assault Raptor could feed targeting data back to friendly capital ships and simultaneously designate targets and firing solutions. This allowed an Assault Raptor to deliver a strike on an enemy base star, then once its munitions were expended, fall back and tell the big guns to focus on any weakened areas or vulnerable systems. I like to imagine it as someone running up and punching you in the stomach before sprinting away, and in that split second that you're convulsing, wheezing, and confused, another significantly larger guy, the Jupiter Battlestar in this case, runs in and delivers a sledgehammer straight to your nuts. This evolution of the Raptor was quite different from what came before and filled the admittedly missing role of a dedicated heavy fighter or bomber in the Colonial fleet, and when operating with Viper squadrons essentially made a Colonial strike group a significant threat to everything it might come up against. However, we also have the other direction of development, further pushing into the electronics and utility of the craft. Now, as far as transport goes, not that important to begin with. However, the electronic warfare stuff and the intelligence gathering is absolutely critical to the proper functioning of any military. And that leads us to the modern Raptor we know and love. You see, while all three of these versions were developed sequentially, the early Raptor being around during the start of the war, the Assault Raptor showing up about halfway through, and the modern version of the Raptor we see developed near the end of the 12-year-long conflict, the modern Raptor is significantly different to everything that came before. Not really in its appearance, but first and foremost, the engines have been embiggened to their normal colossal size, taking up nearly a quarter of the ship's mass. Aside from making the modern Raptor significantly faster, if less maneuverable, it also allowed the installation of a standalone FTL drive. Coupled with the vastly improved sensor suite and electronic warfare systems, the modern version could easily match or exceed the effective jump range of many much larger ships. Similar to the battle bus, this necessitated the removal of the rear segment of the crew compartment and the defensive Gatling guns. But what the modern Raptor lost in maneuverability and anti-toaster weaponry, it gained in mission utility. Now able to scout far afield from wherever it's based and equipped with sensors accurate enough to detect minuscule amounts of water on distant worlds through a nebula, the modern Raptor entered a new role: fleet scout and intelligence gathering. Many of the systems and gimmicks found on the original were carried over, like the underslung breaching door, pod, whatever it's called, and the wings that double as boarding platforms. But the modern Raptor was focused far less on things like transport or cargo hauling, having a reduced capacity of only around 6 people comfortably. However, what's interesting is that this version of the ship can mount similar weapons to the Assault variant. It can't sustain the types of combat the Assault variant can, since the modern Raptor has paper for armor and dreams for defense, but it has hardpoints for mounting extremely heavy weapons payloads. While the Assault Raptor had its weapon systems built in and could reload from the ammunition stored inside, the modern Raptor has them as a custom order bolted on. It can carry 8 large missiles or missile pods underneath, capable of firing everything from unguided rockets to sensors to signal drones to nuclear warheads, or a mix of the entire payload, and instead of the integrated kinetic weapons, the modern Raptor can mount 2 Gatling guns to the tips of the wings. Unfortunately, unlike the Toaster Slayer, these are fixed and can only change their convergence distance, that being how far in front of the ship the 2 streams of bullets will meet. The Assault Raptor has huge internal stores of ammo to keep in the fight if it just, fucks off for a while and reloads, but the modern version is instead focused on the game plan of fuckboys everywhere: dump and dash. Get to the fight, find a target, get to the mission zone, dump all the high explosives or payload they have into the void, and hurry to get out of there as soon as you can, because you really don't want to deal with the consequences afterwards. And this thing, the modern Raptor, is where, for the most part, the canon development of this ship ends, as we know and see in the series. A scout, reconnaissance vehicle, electronic warfare platform, and very rarely, since they're not super good at it, a heavy weapons platform meant to carry missiles and nukes and all kinds of wonderful explosives into combat alongside the Vipers as support. The next segment is going to deal with non-canon variants as well, since it feels like they would just fit nicely in here at the end and develop the lineage of the Raptor a little further. Much shorter, obviously, since there's not much info on them, so we'll make it quick. Starting with a ship from the defunct game Battlestar Galactica Online, the Raptor FR, or Fleet Recon. This is a further development on the modern Raptor and focuses on electronic warfare and sensor systems. The Raptor FR trades even more of its armor and weapons away in exchange for a vastly more powerful computer system and engines. This version hyper-focuses on the support aspect, taking up the majority of its internal space normally used for transport with computer banks, while large sensor systems are bolted onto the outside. The entire purpose of this Raptor is to provide rapid reconnaissance and fleet support. This big boy is meant to fly incredibly fast along the outskirts of Cylon fleets, tracking their movements and jumping away if threatened, essentially shadowing enemy forces and constantly relaying everything they do back to its battle group. If it should find itself in combat, it only has a few paltry missiles to defend itself, but it still has a role in combat. The incredible powerful EW systems on board mean that in a fight it can hide behind friendly ships and disrupt incoming raiders or capital vessels, messing with their engines, disabling their weapon systems, compromising their navigation, or even just turning their power systems off and rendering them sitting ducks. For allies, it can do pretty much the exact same, but in reverse, and most impressively is that it has an FTL jump beacon. Should a recon Raptor find an enemy fleet vulnerable or missing key elements in its composition, it can pop a beacon, allowing members of its battle fleet to jump directly to its position, essentially letting the recon Raptor hot drop an entire Battlestar battle fleet directly onto the forehead of the Cylons. Mercury says hello. And that brings us to the non-canon development of the Assault Raptor, the scimitar from Battlestar Prometheus, which, by the way, to all the people that are still sending me emails full of PDFs of the entire written series, thank you. Please stop. I have about 200 copies of it, and I think that's enough now after reading one of them from front to end. You really don't have to keep doing it. Please, my email is very cluttered. But the scimitar is a further evolution of the Assault Raptor, heavy munitions above all else. And unlike the Assault Raptor, the scimitar isn't heavily armored or meant to live in main combat. It trends more towards the role of a dedicated anti-capital bomber or strike craft. Built off the chassis of the modern Raptor, the scimitar is faster, significantly so due to having the FTL removed and partially used to improve its handling characteristics, but also to house a bomb bay. But what makes it special is the bombs and missiles it carries. Instead of the very large missiles or hundreds of small rockets the Assault Raptor carried, the scimitar instead carries two massive anti-ship missiles under the wings, intended to do critical damage to vulnerable enemy systems. They aren't shown as super big in the very limited reference art, but they're described as being able to render unusable or destroyed the hangar system on a base star, or destroy entire weapons emplacements on gun-armed ships. So I'm assuming that they're big enough to get the same result as a capital class missile, i.e. blowing the prongs off a base star with a good shot. The bombs, however, are meant for a wide spread of non-penetrating damage. Not as direct, and it's the fuck you in particular, big brother the missiles, but the bombs the scimitar carry can carpet a ship, rendering everything on that face completely worthless or non-functional, whether it be weapons, sensors, launch tubes, pretty much anything, though they'll struggle to get through armor and really punch deep into a ship to do critical damage. And that pretty much covers the Colonial Raptor, from early Cylon War to Assault to modern and beyond. And that pretty much concludes the video. While I don't think I missed anything, feel free to let me know if there's some obscure variant or model that I passed over, and if you've made it this far into the video, tell me down below what you would change, add, or remove from a new Raptor variant, and what kind of role you think it would fill in Colonial Fleet. Before we end off, however, a huge thanks to the patrons supporting the channel. You guys are great, and I hope your support will continue in the future. You pay for my groceries after all, and it's a huge load off my back. With a special thanks to all the members of the $5 tier. David G, the original, Augie, 11 Bravo Crunchy, Terry Higgins, Pedro Munaz, David G, the other one, Silencer, Vox Apollyon, Phoenix, BT Legend, Electroboy 11, Logan Maynard, Mickey, David Armand, Creed Dome, Robin Stapp, Fenrir Striker, Tachi Tukane, He's Deb, Pixie, Vertus, Fabric 445, Anchovy Bob, Mini Crustacean, Charles the Snep, Polly, Eric Jones, Joseph Holiday, Zombie the Zerker, David B, Sweet B, Rastro, Le Butcher, and the new guy, Stabby Taco. Thank you very much for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And with that, the video is functionally over. I hope you enjoyed it. Outros are hard. Goodbye.